Hello, good morning and welcome to the Graduation Equity Webinar Series. I'm Kathy Anderson, System Improvement Program Supervisor Lead, and today we are talking about partnerships to support culturally relevant learning. This meeting is being recorded and it should be available pretty much immediately on YouTube. We have closed captions available in the menu if you want to take advantage of that. And we also have the PowerPoint to share with you, as well as a resource page that should help you with the links that we reference. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of Student Engagement and Supports at OSPI. At OSPI, we believe each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. This webinar series was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately to graduation. Through our webinars, we're striving to go beyond equality and to think about the opportunities that we have to examine and dismantle current policies and practices that result in disparate outcomes for our students. We want to acknowledge historical context and engage families, students, communities as partners in this work. I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who've stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still live here today. I'm so grateful to get to live in such a beautiful place. Outside, spring is rising up. I'm seeing little shoots of my bulbs and rabbits are in the brush again, and it's a good time for renewal. We ask that the participants this meeting honor the traditional lands on which each of you are located today, and you can check out the resource sheet if you're not sure. In my life, I mostly travel around the intersection of the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island, the Coast Salish, the Cowlitz, and the Squally tribes. Tribal consultations are a really great way to get to know your local tribes and begin relationships that benefit students and their families. And today we have with us the Office of Native Education, who are an amazing resource to get to know. I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing folks from Chinook, Shoalwater, Wapato, Yakima, Lummi, Squam, Squaxin, Chelan, Squamish, Warnisqually, Coast Salish. Welcome. Walook, yeah, good to see you. We chose this topic because engagement and a sense of belonging can really drive a student to attend school. We know we're happier and healthier when our assignments are relevant, they give us choices, and are leveled to push our skill. Culturally relevant learning helps a school to blend community knowledge and culture into the curriculum and transform it into meaningful credits. It engages students that don't always see themselves or their culture reflected in the culture of the school. It provides space for mentoring and connection to adults that are often a closer racial match to the students. And it honors multiple ways of knowing. Culturally relevant learning is an opportunity to support students of color and to create lasting relationships with your community partners to help fill the gaps that are missing in staffing. No teacher or administrator knows everything, and so by inviting partners in, we provide a more diverse perspective and are living into the value of growth mindset. It's our hope today that we familiarize you with what culturally relevant learning is, and we offer a model for what it might look like in your school. We can get you familiar with some potential partnership options to expand what's happening at your school, and we'll have a practitioner panel to share some examples of how they have kind of navigated these partnerships. I'm joined today by my colleague, Bernie Thomas. He's the interim executive director of the Office of Native Education, and by Dr. Martina Whelshula. She's the co-founder of Swan Innovations, and we'll also have a panel a little bit later on. We'd like to get to know our audience a little bit, so I'm going to launch a poll here, and we're going to see who is in our audience today. We are asking you about your role, what grade band you're most familiar with, and how familiar you are with this topic. Let's take a look here. Not everybody has answered the poll, but this is a good sampling. It looks like we have quite a few counselors in our office, our audience at the moment. We have some district administrators and ESD staff as well. A lot of people who are serving all ages, and a big middle school, high school crowd, and people feel somewhat familiar with this topic. So I think that we can talk about specifics today and get a little deeper. Bernie is from the Office of Native Education, and they just have a wealth of resources. So Bernie, would you want to talk a little bit about your work and introduce your office?
Good morning, Aichquichil, Uaeshqual. So Itano Hilo, Quinnisin Attachulatia Kayasium. Good morning, respected ladies and honored gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning. Very pleased to be able to introduce the Office of Native Education, some of our personnel for the Office of Native Education. We've grown in the last year and a half or so, and in terms of numbers and ability to be partners with you in the endeavor to understand who our Native American Indian students are in your attending your schools, our schools, I should say, and the partnership that we aspire to create need to be based on our understanding, both in the fact that we're conducting this particular meeting in English. It is not by any accident. It's by the systemic purpose of the country to take away the tribal languages and draw the Native American Indian people into the mainstream of the society. And so, in that regard, then the family members of the Native American students are suspicious of the education system just in general. And I hope I'm not too overgeneralizing, but I think that's almost a universal survey response that one would be able to obtain from getting to know different family members of students that may be attending your schools. And part of the goal that we have then today is to make us each familiarized with the idea that the Native American peoples continue to persist as a people, as a society, and that the educators that we have in the Office of Native Education currently includes myself, Mona Halcomb, who is on the call here this morning, Shandy Abrahamson, who is also on the call this morning. She's our Career Connected Learning Tribal Engagement Specialist. Mona is our Native Student Success Program Supervisor, and Kayla Gayad is the Tribal Language Liaison. Arlie, with whom you're going to hear from shortly, will be able to talk to us about mitigating impacts of intergenerational trauma and strengthening relationships through social emotional learning. And I think the other members of our staff, Joan Baker, Carrie Talley, Maxine Alex is our Tribal Consultation Program Supervisor, and she's a fantastic teacher of the since time immemorial curriculum, for example. And that's something that the law is requiring, that all certificated personnel be complete a program of the Office of Native Education to receive the curriculum training with regard to what the since time immemorial curriculum essential learnings include. And Emmy Williamson is as Maxine Alex administrative assistant to help schedule her in all of the different trainings and everything like that. So this morning then is an opportunity not necessarily to focus on the technical how-tos so much as just to meet a fantastic array of the Office of Native Education professionals that are working in the field with you, and to experience some of the things that they have to say in the affective domain of our students in such a way that can help us to recognize the idea that even we as the Office of Native Education professionals recognize that when you've met one tribe, you've met that one tribe. As we like to say, each tribe is unique, and each tribal student is unique. And within each tribe, a lot of treaties and Indian reservations were created in the absence of an adequacy of understanding of who all of the people were that were being forced onto the reservation. In the case of the Lummi people, for example, there were some part of 42 different villages speaking two similar dialects of our language, but not exactly the same. And the misunderstanding of the word chief was kind of like understood to mean the dictator of that tribe or that group. And nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, a chief is kind of a leader by the fact that they have certain followers. And the followers follow that chief because that chief has knowledge or education. And so you have leadership by followership. And, the chief is generally regarded as in a revered position of being a teacher. And so culturally speaking, then teachers are highly revered and almost universally throughout Indian country. And so this is, something that some of these misunderstandings and the attribution that I want to avoid making of our Office of Native Education personnel is that you begin to think of us as somehow being representative of all Native American Indians in Washington State. And based on everything that I'm saying that, we can be bridges to helping you understand who we are in the state of Washington, but we don't in any way represent any of the Indian nations or our family tribal members that may be attending the urban schools, whether that be Spokane or Seattle or Tacoma or Vancouver or wherever they may happen to be located, apart from the fact that I want to say that there are about 350,000 of us in Washington State. I think over 60% of us lives off from the Indian reservation and have moved into the cities and different things like that. And so we may have occasion to have Native American Indian students within your school, but may not be fully aware of it. By inference, then, only the public schools report to us that there's some part of about 70,000 of us attending public schools. But if you took 45% of 350,000, you'd have closer to 150,000 students attending public schools in Washington State, for example. And so part of our task then at the Office of Native Education is to establish, who are our students, where are they, what are their education attainment levels, do they have adequacy of food, clothing, and shelter and medical attention that they might need to be medically ready to be in your school. The graduation rates for our Native American students has always hovered, for the most part in the 70 percentile ranges, and a lot of our students choose that idea that school is not for them by the 8th grade. And so the numbers of our students, the N factor for each of the percentage rates that you're seeing are those students that entered into the 9th grade and then completed high school 4 years later. and graduated. And so these numbers are suspicious to us as well. But part of this partnership is for us to begin to work with you in a way to build bridges of understanding towards, what are those things that relate towards student success factors. And unfortunately, there is no magic wand with regard to increasing the overall rate of graduation for tribal members. But as I always tell our students, there's no shortcut. We just have to do the work together. And part of our commitment to doing that work is to have an education forum such as this, to which I hope you'll engage in conversation with us, and not force us into this us talking at you, but talking with you about what will we do together to better understand and then to better educate our family member tribal students. A few years ago in 2013, I was instrumental in bringing about the state tribal education compact schools. We have Bureau of Indian Education schools, Bureau of Indian Education contract tribal schools, and then tribally controlled schools funded by the Bureau. And in 2013, we added the state tribal education compact schools that at the time included Muckleshoot and Chief Kitsap Academy, and then Lummi Nation was bringing up the rear with being the third to be compacted. Since then, a number of other schools have joined in since then, Chief Leshai and Quileute and, the Wahilut Community School in near Nisqually. And so and Yakima and some of the others, and they have increased their graduation rate to nearly 80% in 2022. But I want to again welcome each and every one of you. We have a lot of problems, as it were, in Indian education of not having successfully together partnered in a way that moves the academic needle forward. And so we want to honor and recognize the severity of the circumstance that our students and family members have found themselves in, may want to attribute some of those circumstances to both a combination of history and education having weaponized against our families, at least in the sense that we're having this meeting in English, in the English language, and not in our tribal languages. And then the other things associated with student academic achievement, and the relevancy of this meeting in particular is to help us to understand what it is that we need to begin to overcome these social circumstances of our family members in such a way that benefit increased graduation rates. And again, I think the main focus of today is for you to meet some really fine people, for our very fine Office of Native Education personnel to begin to understand who you are, and in such a way that a real communication can occur, and meaningful participation with each other towards building a partnership arrangement to better cooperate with one another to advance the academic progress needle forward. And with that, I want to again thank each and every one of you for your participation today. Your being here speaks highly of who you are and your commitment towards education just in general. And I want to pay my respect to and honor each of you for being here in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. And I hope everybody takes advantage of the connection to your office and the awesome stuff that y'all have going on. I think that this work is, it is not mainstream yet, and it would be great to see it continue to spread throughout our state in a more holistic kind of way. Today we have with us Dr. Martina Whelshula. She's a partner and she's CEO in a consulting business, Swan Innovations LP, with her daughter Cree Whelshula. Swan Innovations envisions cultural vitality and overall good health for Indigenous people and tribal communities. Dr. Whelshula has worked extensively with Native American communities nationwide on local and national policy development, on education, tribal culture, and behavioral health. Her professional experience has ranged from research director for national Indian health policy development, for congressional review, for P-12 tribal language instructor. She's been in the public school system. She's been a Head Start director for the Colville tribe to tribal college president. Dr. Whelshula served for nearly 7 years as the executive director of a Native American inpatient treatment program for drug and alcohol addicted youth. She's an educator, trainer, and consultant specializing in Indigenous education and intergenerational trauma impacting Indigenous communities. Dr. Whelshula's most recent work is the collaborative development of an integrative cultural healing model addressing intergenerational colonial trauma, culturally grounded mental health approach, and substance use disorders for tribes. She also serves as principal investigator for Native American Research Centers for Health Research in collaboration with Harvard Medical School's Division on Addiction. We're so excited that you're here to help us learn, and welcome, Dr. Whelshula.
Why happy to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. And what I'm going to do is basically take a full day. So you're going to get a 30-minute snapshot of what trainings that we normally do in a full day training. So hang in there with me as we get through all of this information. And thank you, Bernie, for the lead in also. I have been in Indian education for over 40 years. And so I've been able to see all of the kind of the renditions of what Indian education has been, and just kind of looking at where our children are within that education system. And a lot of basically what happens is that a lot of Indian education in general has been a Western construct. And what we used to say is then what we ended up doing for Indian education is just kind of adding beads and feathers. So the construct is still a Western construct, but then trying to adapt it, in Native culture. So from my perspective, to me, today's educational crisis is grounded in a conflict between those psychocultural worldviews. And so looking at, because this is not just about just a kind of a social construct, this is really about a psychological worldview that goes everywhere that the children go. I was able to, in a lot of the research that I do, I always go back to the statistics and see where we're at with the kids. And in one of the most recent trainings that I was developing, I decided to go way back to see how far back I could go. And looking at going back to the Merriam report in 1929 up to this point, just looking at that our children, Native American children, have nearly a century of the most egregious educational outcomes of all races in Washington state and nationally. And so then the alarms kind of went off in my head, is like, oh my gosh, this is almost a century, and that's recorded history, right? So there's a couple questions that I like to ask education leaders, educators, faculty, and others, is that why are Native American children struggling most in the public education system? And to kind of reflect on that, so what do you think is the reason why they're struggling in the education system? It used to be that, state leaders would say, well, it's poverty, type of a thing. Well, if it was only poverty, I always contend that we would be good fundraisers, type of a thing. And so looking at that, there's something more there. But in my own mind, I was wondering if we were able to kind of keep it, able to continue for so long, and there's no alarms going off like, whoa, something's going on here. We need to do something. There's no sense of urgency and trying to remedy this for children. How has it been able to go on for so long and nothing's been done about it? So those are really profound questions when you think about almost a century of the worst educational outcomes. So again, going back to the recorded history, back to 1928 in the Merriam Report, where they called Indian education grossly inadequate. And then in 1969, the Kennedy Report called Indian education a national tragedy. And here's what came out of that report, that 1 out of every 4 teachers self-admitted to not want to teach Indian children. Now imagine that child or those children, because children are little emotional sponges and sensors, right? They can pick up when somebody does not like them. And to have 1 out of 4 teachers say that they didn't want to teach Indian children. In 1972, we go to the Indian Education Act. In 1991, Indian Nations at Risk, an educational strategy for action. In 2000, we have the BIA and DoD school student achievement. And then in 2003, a quiet crisis, federal funding and unmet needs in Indian country. And today we still have the poorest educational outcomes by race in the United States. So going back to like 2020, in looking at the data, so Native American students have the highest dropout rates nationally. They have the lowest completion rates in Washington state and national. They have the highest discipline rates in Washington state. They have the second highest out-of-school suspension rates nationally, and the second lowest % of students meeting standard next to Pacific Islanders in Washington state. So we need to look at something more than just academics, just kind of looking at, funding and all of those things just kind of being thrown at it, right? And consider what's going on with our children today in the context of a colonial colonization and of genocide. And so if we look at intergenerational trauma, we're looking at both epigenetic inheritance, epigenetic trauma, which is literally passed on through our genes to each successive generation. And then also the experience trauma that our children go through. So we can understand that out of context of that history of colonization. And it was a very brutal process, and we're still trying to heal from it today. And it's been centuries, since this whole process had started. So we look at massacres, of tribes, of whole tribes, right? We have hangings. We have waves of disease epidemics. I used to think it was just one wave of smallpox, but it was actually several waves throughout the century, land theft, land that was just taken away from the tribes. We have wars, the damming up of rivers, the forced removal of children, and then taking those children at the ages of as young as 3 and 4 years old, taking them from their families. It was a law, and putting them into residential boarding schools, where you had, you can see the picture here on the lower right, where you have hundreds of children, and so children were ending up having to take care of other children because of the student staff ratio was just so low. They outlawed tribal cultural practices. So it was against the law for us to practice our culture and our spirituality. And then the sexual servitude, sex trafficking of young Indian girls and women. So all of that, think about that trauma, that cumulative trauma that comes up through the generations. And if we look at the epigenetics, and this is really profound when we think about how that trauma gets passed on. So epigenetics, it proposes that we pass along more than DNA in our genes. It suggests that our genes can carry memories of trauma experienced by our ancestors and can influence how we react to trauma and stress. So trauma experienced by earlier generations can influence the structure of our genes, making them more likely to switch on negative responses to stress and trauma. And so you have different, depending on the trauma, you have different methyl groups that attach to certain genes and will determine if that gene gets boosted or if it gets turned down. if certain genes like stress regulation genes get turned down, like get methylated, then it's hard. Then we're in kind of in this persistent fear, right? Where children are kind of in this hyper aroused, and it's difficult to go down into baseline, you know, where they can just kind of calm down in a sense, because there's always this, you know, going on. But that's a part of that epigenetic inheritance. Goes back 2 generations. So as my epigenetic inheritance is dependent upon my grandmother at that time that she was in utero, you know, in the first year of her life. And if we look at experienced trauma, in 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice said that Native American and Alaska Native children experience PTSD at the same rate as combat veterans who returned from Iraq and Afghanistan, and triple the rate of the general population. That's really profound when you think about soldiers returning from 2 wars, that Native American children have the same rate as those soldiers in PTSD. ACEs, the average ACE score for American Indians is approximately 50% higher than for individuals who identify as white. So those are adverse childhood experiences. And that studies show that mental health challenges are linked to poor educational outcomes, and mental health is a predictor of educational achievement. Think about a child who has trauma, and they're in this hyper-aroused, they're in that persistent fear, they have anxiety, and they get triggered, right? Their brain and their bodies get hijacked. They don't even realize what's going on. So they're responding out of their trauma, those trauma responses. And then you have teachers and school staff punishing them when what they needed to do was to support them and to assure them that they're safe. And so once we understand what's going on with the children, then what we perceive is going on with them, then we can respond to them in a different way that's more kind and compassionate and loving and supportive, and helping them to be able to learn. So we talk about cultural resilience, and how does tribal culture help, and how is it a resilience factor type of a thing. And so Harvard University's Center on the Developing Child came up with 4 factors of resilience. We have two of the top ones are, number 1, facilitating supportive adult-child relationships, which is key to epigenetic healing of trauma. They say it needs to be extreme bonding, right? Cultural traditions, spirituality, and spiritual beliefs are right there. So it is important because they can be, factors for resilience, but it goes much deeper when we think about the healing that can occur through the culture. And so we talk about, my daughter and I, we like to do a lot of, so there's a lot of research on the neurobiology of trauma, but also the neurobiology of culture. And so we've been able to go in our culture, which is we're members of the Colville Confederated Tribes, the Arrow Lakes Nation of the Colville Confederated Tribes in Eastern Washington. So we take our cultural practices and what the elders teach us. And what we're finding out, that's just exciting when we kind of get into it, the neurobiology of culture, but how does that help with trauma? And so the emergence of neurobiology has shed light on what Native people have always known, is that tribal culture is a protective factor and it builds resilience in Native children. That culture plays a huge role in relieving stress, building self-esteem and self-efficacy, creating stability, and overall is a resilience and protective factor. So I had a chance to go to, in my doctoral program, I had a chance to go to the islands in Hawaii and Oahu and Hilo, and got to travel and visit with the communities there. And I got to travel and visit a Hawaiian language and culture immersion school. And it was amazing because they taught through the language. They didn't just teach about the language and culture. They taught the culture through the language in that immersion. And so what they're finding out now is that the Hawaiian language and culture immersion schools have 100% high school graduation rates and 80% college graduation rates. that when Native students' language and culture are part of their education, research shows that retention rates, attendance rates, and overall academic achievement improve. So this is a lesson plan that I had developed in working with the Spokane Tribes language program and also the Welpinit School District. And so how do we take state standards, right? And we take those state standards, but we blend them with cultural standards and looking at how what the teachings that we can integrate throughout the curriculum. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. Like, how do we do this, you know, with curriculum and lesson plans and those kinds. So I did this for a first grade class in science and teaching them about mule and white-tailed deer on the reservation. And so, of course, we have those standards that were the objectives, you know, that we're trying to achieve, you know, through this science project, and then the goals. But also what I have down below is that I insert the cultural concepts that are important to teach the children from an Indigenous worldview, that animals have a special relationship in tribal culture. Animals are honored and respected. Animals are seen as teachers, guides, and relatives, as well as being key to survival. So we teach those cultural concepts in those lesson plans, you know, to the children. So then, you know, developing, you know, the lesson plan itself and kind of delineating between how do we identify a mule deer and how do we identify a white-tailed deer. And then also bringing in the language. So then, you know, we can translate the deer, you know, and the terms that we want them to learn, but also teaching it to them in their language, because that's going to anchor it, right? So say, for instance, with white-tailed deer, our word for deer is tlachinam. And if we look at the morphology of that word, what it means is, and what it describes is looking for food. And so it's teaching us, you know, that the deer are looking for food, right? Our word for frog is swarachen, which is like croaking feet. And so the Indigenous worldview in our languages are verb-based. So they describe the universe, right? They describe phenomena. And so that's where it's important to bring in the language, because then they're learning the morphology of their language. And they're not just learning it, oh, this means, you know, and then an English translation. You know, it's teaching us from our worldview. We include tribal values, you know, respect all living things, you know, respect for the land and the environment and generosity, the sacredness of relationships, even with the natural world, right? Those are sacred relationships that we have. That's deep ecology. So we go into, you know, activities. And so what I included in this particular activity is a story, a teaching that is taught to us about how the first foods were given. And the foods being like the animals, the roots, the berries, and the fish, the underwater people. And so, you know, reading and telling the legend to the children, and it tells us about the relationship that we have with all of these relatives, is what we call them. And so what we would learn through, once you tell the story, what we would learn is that you only take what you need and no more, that you treat the habitat with respect so that more animals and plants can grow there, that you take great care in how you care for the body of the animal and plant, show great respect for the gift of food that the animal and plant have given, and dispose of leftovers with respect. That's teaching a worldview, and those are core values about how we give thanks and gratitude, and how we treat the plants and the animals and the berries and the fish, you know, because they are giving their life for us. And so it's a gift to us. And a sacrifice. The elder Pauline Flett said that they give way, W-E-Y, which is it's a sacrifice out of love, is basically what the animals and plants do. So back in the early or the late 1990s and the early 2000s, when I was working with OSPI at that time and the Native Education Program, we found the Alaskan Standards for Culturally Responsive Schools, and it was great. So what we did was that we talked to them and asked if we could, you know, adopt and adapt these to our tribes, and they said yes. So we developed these tribal standards for culturally responsive schools in Washington State. These are cultural standards for students, educators, schools, curriculum, and communities. And so this is actually an 8-page document It's great information. It's a great template and a great map, to guide you, to how do you become a culturally responsive school. And then also, you can find this document. I think it's under the resources. You can find it on the Swan Innovations. I have it under resources where there's a PDF there that you can, take it and use it, as you want, basically to help you with that. But we have cultural standards for educators. So these are just 2 out of the 18-page document. One is that culturally responsive educators incorporate local ways of knowing and teaching in their work. And so you have all of these, educators who meet this cultural standard, recognize the validity and integrity of the traditional knowledge systems, utilize elders' expertise in multiple ways in their teaching, provide opportunities and time for students to learn in settings where local cultural knowledge and skills are naturally relevant. And then we have in B is culturally responsive educators use the local environment and community resources on a regular basis to link what they are teaching to the everyday lives of students. So going into, regularly engage students in appropriate projects and experiential learning activities in the surrounding environment. Nature-based education works great for Native kids. Actually, I think it works great for all kids, but especially for Native kids because it's so highly contextualized, the learning that happens in those. So we're talking about building partnerships for cultural relevant learning. And so what we have is that there was one of the regional comprehensive centers had done a lit review. And what the lit review revealed are factors that are perceived to encourage Native parent and tribal community involvement. And they include a caring, supportive, and communicative school staff, culturally respectful environment, access to American Indian programs, resource centers, after-school activities and clubs, and the presence of an advocate or liaison in each school. So these are things that, and it makes a huge difference, when we walk into the school and how we're greeted. That first impression that we get will determine, whether or not a family or a community members are going to be wanting to engage with the school district. So they also identified factors perceived to discourage Native parent involvement, which include feeling unwelcomed or intimidated at the school and perceptions of racism and discrimination. Families that are experiencing scheduling, transportation, childcare, and financial difficulties makes it hard for them to be engaged. Or the families having prior negative experiences in their own or their children's education, and perception of a school's lack of cultural sensitivity, and the different styles of interpersonal communication. Because, in Western communication, very direct, right? Very direct. And in tribal communities, we have a whole different way of, there's a whole different way of communicating that is not direct like that is more respectful, and just kind of, I don't even know if we have a word to describe how it is, but there's that difference in interpersonal communication that's huge. Or that can be huge. And so being mindful of how we communicate to families. So what I always like to say is that before anything, first things first, is that before children can learn in any capacity, is that we have to create an emotionally and a psychologically safe learning environment. If their lower brain is being hijacked from fear, and just, that they get triggered, they can't learn. They can't get access to their prefrontal cortex to be able to do the kind of cognitive, work that they need to do in school. And so we have to make sure that these children, when they're acting out of their trauma responses, that they're being supported, but not being punished. And so again, it's that extreme bonding, right? That doesn't mean being permissive and, those types of things. It's about being a good relative. It's about being respectful to the children and recognizing their trauma histories and how their behavior is a trauma response. And stop punishing children when they act out of their trauma responses, because that's cumulative trauma, right? Now we have educational trauma on top of intergenerational and epigenetic, so and Teachers and school staff can traumatize children just by the way that they look at them, the way that they talk to them, their tone, their posture, all of that. Because children, when, I have complex PTSD, we're scanning everything to see if there's a threat or if this is safe. And they pick up on nuanced moods and temperaments and all of that kind of stuff. So we have to be self-aware when we're working with these children. What are we doing? What kind of a psychological and emotional environment are we creating for these children? If we look at the ACEs and school performance, what they were finding out in several studies that reveals that children, students dealing with trauma are 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade, score lower on standardized achievement test scores, have more receptive or expressive language difficulties, are suspended or expelled more often, and are designated to special education more frequently. So if we're looking at, in addition to building partnerships with families, extended family, tribes, tribal leaders, elders, we also need to build partnerships with behavioral health organizations, and building a robust mental health response for students with trauma is essential. And I recommend this, and I'm just pushing this. This is my mantra, kind of my soapbox, is that we need to implement a system-wide trauma-informed approach, because this will not only help Native children, this is going to help all children who have trauma histories. So let's just create systems, that are informed about trauma, and teachers and educators being trauma attuned. What am I doing that might trigger this student? So if we look at like culturally responsive pedagogy, curriculum, and instructional strategies, what I like to put up here is that many times you don't know what you don't know. And if you can just kind of be in that place and be curious, right? So develop a genuine interest in learning about tribal culture, because our worldviews between Western and Indigenous worldviews, they're so almost opposite. And so to learn about that would be really helpful in understanding what the children are experiencing and how you might be more supportive of them, right? So to develop that genuine interest in learning about tribal culture, reach out to families, the extended families. So that's aunties, uncles, grandparents. My son, I noticed that he was, when he was in second grade, that he had a long braid that went down to the small of his back. And I noticed he started tucking his braid into his shirt, and before he would go to school. And I finally asked him, I said, brother, what's going on? I noticed that you tuck your braid in your shirt. And he was saying how he would get like harassed at school about his hair. And then, they would pull on it, and things like that. My husband, our family, were war dancers, and drummers. And so we decided, my husband had long hair and braids. So let's go into the school. Let's do a war dance exhibition for the students. And let's talk about hair, the long hair that Indian men and boys wear, type of a thing, so that they can understand. So those are the ways that you can have other, family members, grandparents, others in the community to be a part of that. The local tribes, connecting with them, local tribal cultural knowledge keepers, elders, and the Native American cultural education nonprofits. And I include our nonprofit Kuchin He, because we have a lot of training resources there that the whole site is about language and cultural revitalization. So hooking up with different nonprofits that specialize in that will be helpful too. Infuse Native American teachings, culture, and history throughout all domains. Don't relegate cultural teaching to after-school activities only. It's across all of the subject areas. And if you do it highly contextualized lessons, then it can touch all of those areas in context, right? And then developing instructional strategies that are responsive to Native American learning styles and intelligences. And I had a problem with, my son, he was having problems in English. And when I went to visit his teacher to talk about it, I talked about him and the school that he came from, the reservation school. And she was embarrassed because she said that she did her thesis on multiple intelligences, but she did implement it in her teaching. And so about a week or so later, my son came home from school. I think it was in about 9th grade. And I said, well, how'd it go today, brother? And he said, I learned that I'm that I'm not stupid. And I go, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, I just learned that I learned differently. And it about made me want to cry because I didn't know that he felt stupid. But that they hold it, right? They internalize it, that there's something wrong with them. And so looking at ways that we can, different learning styles, hugely different learning styles, that we can adjust, our instructional strategies. And that's not going to only help Native kids, that'll help all other kids on that continuum. Because not all children learn in that, very Western linear kind of left brain, way of learning, so just recognizing that this can, go out to all children. Recommending instructional strategies for cultural differences, allow time for thought versus giving, instant answers, to ensure positive interdependence, which is our cultural value, not independence, to ensure positive interdependence while working with cooperative learning. 2 requisites must be that students should feel on the same side and a task that should require them to work together. I think so much of the public education system is about competition. And our children feel like, they're not measuring up in that way. Looking at a variety of modalities to demonstrate their knowledge and skill. Lessons should be highly contextualized. Treat the child with respect. So you need to model it to them. And assigning the child with a family community responsibility that's appropriate for their age, because then they feel like they can give. They have something of value to contribute to their community and their family. And then watch, then do. Listen, then do. Those are key cultural values that we have. And in the end, this cartoon never gets old. It is so apropos when we think about, Native children in the system. And so he says that for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So you have an elephant and a penguin and you have a goldfish in a goldfish bowl. I mean, think about that, that everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. I'm sorry, but it happens all the time. And that's what the issue is, right? We have both trauma and we have both this psychocultural conflict of worldviews. And if we can mitigate those, and if we can be more interested in Indian children and their culture and how they learn and creating this great environment for family and communities, that's an extraordinary partnership. And, if you have any questions or, Swan Innovations, email us, those, but, and then plus the Office of Indian Education. I can't wait to hear Arlie's and the others, because they bring so much more, how social emotional learning is so key to that Indigenous worldview, and he was even suggesting a SEL standard, cultural standards. And I'm like, yes, Arlie, we need to do that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Whelshula. Let's all give Dr. Whelshula a huge round of applause. Lots of love in the chat as well. Yay, Dr. Whelshula. I love the parallel, just thinking about competition and the role that it plays in our school system and how it undermines a sense of belonging. I think that's a really profound idea that I'm gonna take with me. As people are thinking about this presentation, if you do have questions for Dr. Whelshula, I'm not seeing any in the Q&A yet. Is that right, Jocelyn? If you do have questions, you can put them there.
No open questions at this time. Everyone's just singing their praises to Dr. Whelshula and the Office of Native Ed.
Right. We do have a polling question. Our Office of Native Education wants to connect with you. So if you are interested in learning more, we're trying a new polling feature where you can think that you should be able to type something in. Stop sharing. Okay. So we'll try it and see how this goes. But if the other button doesn't work, you can also email Mona Halcomb, and she'll be able to connect you with some resources as well, if there's something on there that you're interested in. Yeah, lots of opportunities for tribal consultation, tribal sovereignty, SEL and SED, tribal language, lesson integration. And I'm going to leave this poll open so that if you'd like to think about it for a second, you can. But I do want to go on to our panel. What does this look like in real life? And what do these partnerships have going on? We have today Arlie Naskehi from the Diné Nation, and we have Kayla Gayette from OSPI. She's our tribal language liaison, as well as Linda McKay, the assistant superintendent in ESD 171. I want to just take a moment and have each person talk a little bit about their experience with these. So I think it'd be great to start with Arlie, actually, because Arlie, you do trainings on culturally relevant learning, and you're taking kind of the cultural ideas from tribes and helping people integrate those into lessons and into the school experience as a whole. What does that training look like? Can you tell us a little bit about your approach and what people, could use?
Yes, yat ashid adoshidina katli chinishya nanishteji tachinishla since a carni bushichin Korchini dashache clash dashanala ego nanshla. Good to see everybody here on the Zoom today. I am currently contracted as the Office of Native Education Social Emotional Development Project Coordinator. And the work that I do is really looking at inviting and utilizing our cultural life ways, which to me is our science and knowledge, our way of being, and how we do things to build social emotional growth and nurture it. And I'm very excited about this. It's a combination of many of the things that's being spoken about here. As I've done work again over the last 3+ decades to myself, I've seen these same statistics for decades going on. And I've also seen a lot of the things that have occurred in this society. In the 90s, I was working in Los Angeles when the gangs really began to up their game all over the place. And I'll never forget when I visited a playground there, and there were these concrete benches in a circle. And I said, are these like a maze for a game? And they said, no, that's for drive-by shootings. When we give the signal, the kids are trained to jump behind them. And so, you know, starting with that, this began to appear around schools and those things. And later on, then bullying and all those things really took steam. Began to see schools doing character development and posting signs all over. And so as that was beginning to happen, I was reflecting on my life growing up and listening to the elders and reflecting upon our stories, our creation stories, and all these teachings. And it began to arise then in me that this is what our people do, that this is a very core of how we live. And some of the teachings are so fundamental that even from our first breath, we cry with that first breath. All humanity cries. And from that first cry that we emit, whoever hears that cry and picks us up, that is our first connection, our first relationship. That's the first thing we do as a human on this earth. And so that's the beginning of social emotional development. I choose development rather than social emotional learning. I do that for two reasons. One, social emotional learning kind of implies that if you achieve all the standards and benchmarks, then you got it. You're a graduate of it. Whereas social emotional development to me is from birth and all through your life. And as you move different places, and it's dynamic. And Native kids will be able to tell you which classrooms they feel safe in, which ones they don't feel safe in, which ones they are trust that classroom environment culture to engage in other classes where they will not engage. They'll tell you administrators that they will listen to, administrators that they won't listen to. So cultural development is a dynamic process going up and down all the time. And Martina talked about that. Wherever we go, we're scanning all the time to see if this is a safe place. And a lot of you probably heard that in cross-cultural trainings over the many years. People of color, the first thing they do when you go in a room, you look to see, are there any other brown people in here? So beginning to look at then, how is it that we can encourage schools to begin to invite and make plans, and above all, partnerships, partnering with the Native community. And that Native community in an urban setting could be the community that lives there and the leadership that has evolved over time. It could then the other way, you know, the most direct way is the local tribe that is right there. And so there's different ways like that. So we focus on that too. We really focus on looking at that. We've utilized some of the work from both Cree and Martina and others in the field with intergenerational trauma. So we do an overview of that. And then we jump from that then to mitigating trauma through social emotional development. And so we do highlight major areas of how our culture and go walk through that. A lot of educators have never really looked at things from that perspective. As Martina was talking, I was like, wow, this is pretty powerful business. If you look at her lessons, how they are structured, if somebody could pull up that one, let's see, where's it at? Let me see if I can find it. Oh boy. Yeah, it's the one on cultural standards for educators. It looks like it's page 34 of the slide deck I have. You could show that again.
Mm-hmm.
So real hallmark then in trauma response, when we do this, we look at what are the needs then of children who are from generations of trauma. And two things really rise to the surface: trust and belonging. Trust and belonging. And so educators in our trainings, they can see this, and we use emotional word sheets and things to help with empathy. You know, if this happened to you, how might you feel if this was happened to you or your family? And so the goal for me is empathy. I don't like guilt. You know, the guilt doesn't go anywhere. It just makes people mad at each other. But we can empathy. We all have that ability. So by doing that and then beginning to look and see what can we do. So to me, if a educator utilizes these processes, these styles of pedagogy, these styles of relationships with Indigenous students, they are going to have a very strong likelihood. They're going to up the game for themselves of impacting a sense of trust. This person is willing to be inclusive. This person is willing to hear the voice of my people. This person is willing to look at the truth of what happened to us. And this person is willing to invite our ways of thinking, our ways of knowledge and being into the learning and conversation. One of the things I'm focusing on too in my work is this is a two-sided street. Social emotional learning development is not just all in the hands of the kids in order for them to learn to behave and sit still in class. It really is the other side too. As educators, increasing your social emotional skills with working with children from other cultures. So to me, when I look at those types of strategies, those concepts, ways of being within the classroom, you as an educator are increasing your social emotional skills, and you will have a greater likelihood of your social and emotional development with Indigenous children to increase, and that bonding to begin to occur. So, and with bonding, so many places, and Zaretta Hammond talks about this, when a child is bonded to an educator, that educator then is very likely to be able to move to a warm demander. And a warm demander in a child's life is one that has the ability to call them to higher levels of achievement, higher levels of being, higher levels of work ethic, all those things. And I love Roger Fernandez. He always says that. He says, if you connect with the native child, this is the way he puts it, that child will do anything for you. And he talks about teachers who have that effect in this life. And a lot of us, myself too, many of us in our histories, we can go back to non-native teachers who played that role in us. And they were ones who were those warm demanders and were able to call us up to yeah, it's just that impetus. It's a powerful thing. Let me see what else. So we work on developing then strong partnerships with Native community, Native tribes, and what that looks like. We give them guidelines around that they can begin to utilize. And then at the end of the training, people then begin to look and strategize on how can we form these partnerships? What are some of the cultural life ways that might be available? And how do we properly obtain the permission and the acknowledgement from the local knowledge keepers in order to utilize these practices with schools? So I have to say, here's an eagle feather. It was a huge battle that ensued, and some of it is still going on across the country, of the right for our children to wear these during graduation ceremonies. And as those debates and all that, some of them were battles. Kids were kicked out of schools, and parents were shamed, and a lot of that occurred. And as I saw that happening, I wish I could have gone and just talked to each one of them and let them know when we bestow one of these upon our children for the accomplishments and achievements that they have attained, this is one of the highest honors that we can bestow from our people, from our elders. I still have the eagle feather that my father gave me when I graduated. I've given eagle feathers to each of my children, and also to my grandsons as they graduate. I've seen over the years in graduation ceremonies, both in high school and college, people making a mockery of the graduation. They put crazy things on their mortar caps, different things. They wear different kinds of crazy face masks and things like that. When we're bringing this to a graduation, it's the highest honor, and even to a level of reverence that we're bringing. So I really appreciate all the people who advocate for this and those who are still advocating across our country and across our lands. So I tell people, I encourage administrators, do not be afraid of our culture. It is through our culture that we pass on the values. And as you saw in the lesson, Martina and other people who are doing this, it's really cool. If you look at it, it's happening around us. As she lists the tribal values that are included in these lessons, those are the areas of character building. Those are the areas that we are implanting and bringing to our children that's going to help them grow for a whole lifetime, to guide their ways of thinking, of being, and relating to others. Let me see what else I want to say. That's about it. So then they leave with a plan, and this has been very exciting, and we really appreciate. We're on this contract will end June 30th. So between now and June, we're going to be holding 4 more trainings. We've done 2 already in Fife, Washington, and Anacortes, and we've got 4 more to go. I'll put those into the chat here.
Awesome.
And these trainings on social emotional development are targeted initially for STEC schools, tribal compact schools, and also ESSA schools, those that require tribal consultation. So they'll get first priority, and if there's room still available, then it will be opened up for other schools who are interested, who may have Indigenous connection or just are interested. So I put that into the chat. You can contact Joan Binker, and she may also put you on a waiting list, you know, as some of these are going. So those are where they're going to be. We're finishing 3 on the west side, and then the other ones on the east side are scheduled later so that we can pass over Snoqualmie Pass when it warms up a little bit, hopefully. Yeah, and the other part that I heard Martina talk about was in terms of trauma response to create emotionally safe, psychologically safe learning environment and stop punishing our children's trauma responses. Yeah, you know, then again, in that regard, with the reality of what history has occurred, then how do you deal with people who come from that? And so, yeah, to me, that's a social emotional skill. That is something, a skill that an educator needs to be developed to. And so some of you might benefit from just imagining, you know, what if a student came from Ukraine right now and entered your class? You'd be able to pretty much empathize with them, and these emotional social skills would come out within you in order to wrap around them. So a lot of what's happened in America has been really repressed. We're thankful for the time right now with all the social justice initiatives. A lot of people have become, especially the young educators, have no fear anymore. We do not want to pass on myths and fairy tales anymore. We want to deal with the truth, and we really appreciate that. I always say that we have been the conscience of America over the last 500 years. And so when I sent my kids to school, I told them as little kids, you're going to hear things about our people in these schools that it's not true. And if you have any questions, you know, you can come to me and I will tell you the truth. And so that's how it's been. That's how it was said to me. And that's how it will continue to be. So we welcome those others who are joining us on this. And we hope with this, I can tell you from my standpoint, I hope that this model continues and grows so that not only our culture, but cultures of other people too as well. Each culture has developed very sophisticated, very deep ways of helping to raise good human beings. And so it's not just, you know, one thing fits all. So with that, I'll go ahead and close. I didn't even look at the clock. I can talk about this all day. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them into the chat too.
Yeah, thank you, Arlene. I mean, I think about just the opportunity to evaluate a lesson plan based on some cultural knowledge and getting more in contact with your tribe so that you know more about the local lifeways and just opportunities to talk about your local area is awesome.
I did leave out one concept, and that was when Martina was telling the story of the lesson plan that started with whitetail and mule deer, then ended with a story of how foods were first given. So you've got some scientific kind of stuff there, biology stuff going there, and then local place-based science, and then you end up with deep philosophical and spiritual teachings of the local people. what we do in the training, we bring examples of these things forth. And then after, for example, I wish we could have stopped and had everybody pulled out the state standards, SEL standards at that point and said, what is in this lesson? Because a lot of people have just trivialized our ways of life, their folk tales, their mythology, their primitive thinking. And so when you look at this, if you look at it through the lens of the standards, you're going to be calling out a whole bunch of those. So that's one of the things that we do on both sides for school administrators and educators to practice doing that from a different lens, as well as our people also beginning to look at that. And it creates a bridge of communication between the two cultures on what actually is going on and the depth and power of nurturing social emotional development.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm curious, I mean, it sounds like y'all have been working with ESD 171, and we have Linda McKay with us today to talk a little bit about that collaboration. And Linda, I mean, like, what has it been like to go through this process and to create that kind of bridge with your tribes?
All right. Hi, Kathy. I just first want to start by saying I'd rather not be presenting and hearing more from Arlie and Dr. Martina. Wow. I'm going to dig into that, those standards and look through those things. So thank you. I'm honored to be here today. I get the honor and blessing to partner with and learn from everyone at the Office of Native Ed, starting with Dr. Laura Lynn, Shandy, Mona, Maxine, Kayla, Rebecca, Joan, Bernie, and now Arlie. So I've just been blessed. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of our journey. And as Bernie said earlier, if you know one, you don't know, if you know one tribe or you don't know them all. So I'm going to share the journey that we've had here in our region with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation and how we have grown. Our journey began back with the Office of System and School Improvement when we received a specific focus area on tribal programs and tribal relations. And from there, I can just tell you in the past 4 years, I have learned more about tribal relationships, our local tribe, than I have the previous 50 years living literally 1 mile from our local tribe. So with that, we started learning about tribal sovereignty. What is it? Why is it important? And the myths that are out there, because there's a lot. We then stepped into, and Bernie started with it earlier, with data and the importance of data, because I believe we do not have, when I say clean data, I should probably use the word accurate data on our students. We're missing some of our Native students just by how we record our students in the system. So we started there. And we have Native students in all of our schools, not just those that live close to a reservation or on the reservation. We found that, I see Dr. Martina nodding her head, Spokane School District, even though it's close to the Spokane tribe, they have many, many Colville tribal member students and descendants there. So from there, we learned about, we call it Big C and Little C. And what is this term called consultation, and how should it be meaningful and the importance of it? And Shandy helped walk me through, and I learned how to request to be on our council's agenda and present our information in our school improvement plan. And I have to tell you, I was scared. I was scared in the fact that I was coming before the council and the government, and I wanted to be respectful, and it was a great day of learning for me and being present there. And then the learning continued, the journey, and will never arrive. So just like today, we don't prefer to call it a professional development. It's a learning journey. So our relationship, partnership, and collaboration has grown with our Colville tribe. We have learned that their focus, some of the things they're focusing on is expanding their CTE, dual credit, college and the high school, apprenticeships, and career exploration. I'm going to get the number wrong, but I want to say that they employ at least 1,400 staff members at the tribe. And there are a lot of opportunities there for students and careers. I meet regularly with their Director of Employment and Education, Tammy James, and also the council committee chair, who is Cody Pione. I meet monthly with their youth development supervisor. And just recently, we've started supporting the consultation with our districts. And when I say support from our end, we noticed that last year when they were conducting the formal consultation, they were missing data. The tribe wanted very meaningful data, qualitative and quantitative, about the students they were serving. And so we are supporting that piece in terms of making sure that that our school districts can provide the accurate data as they go before the council and the committee on formal consultation. And most recently, just 2 days ago, our team of 8 instructional specialists had the pleasure of working with the curriculum development department as well as the youth development department. And we learned about the Colville specific STI curriculum and what resources were there, how we could collaborate in the future. We're going to do some outdoor authentic learning experiences with STEAM in the field in an authentic, natural setting. And so again, that's just a little bit of our journey. I'm going to be reaching out to you, Dr. Martina, to see if you could come present in our region and continue our learning. But again, this is in our context and ours locally, but I can just tell you it's a wonderful journey.
Yeah, and I want to give a couple minutes to Kayla too. Kayla works on tribal language at OSPI and is our tribal language liaison. And I know tribal language programs are a great part of this work. And Kayla, just out of like my own, I'm curious, like how would a school get started with tribal language? What would that look like if they were going to do that?
I will try not to talk too fast. But good day, folks. My name is Kayla Guyette. So there's a couple ways to do this and a couple different answers, but I will just start with first and foremost, it was said a couple times, but just acknowledging, right? The language that our students, families, and ancestors have spoken was stripped from them. It was taken away and it was banned by the same institutions that we all work in today. And it's really important for us to acknowledge that. And it's really important for us to carve out space in our own professional lives, whether we're in classrooms or admin or ESDs, wherever we're at. You know, it's important that we take some of our time to carve out room for tribal languages. And that can happen in a couple different ways. I mean, the first is just exposure, right? That we're just allowing our students to see their tribal languages in their classrooms throughout multiple subjects. Not that we are teachers of the language, but that we are just making it available for it to be seen and have space to take that up. So that's probably the easiest way. Our tribes here in Washington, but across the US, spends millions of dollars creating content that is publicly available. So I always encourage folks, you know, reach out to your partner tribe and just see what they already have available out there for the public, because I'm sure they do have language. But the deeper answer is, right, that we have to go through a consultation process. And this is both a big C and a little c consultation process, where we're meeting with the tribe and we're saying, how much language do you want to see in our school district? You know, how much would you like to invest in us being able to teach language for your students to be able to hear it in the classroom, but also for your students to be able to earn credit in tribal languages? And we have a really strong push right now to make sure that our students can graduate with tribal language credits instead of having to defer to Spanish or French or German or whatever, right? But really acknowledging that tribal language is absolutely qualifies as a world language credit, and you should be able to graduate with that on your transcript. I know we have some folks in the chat who are doing it right now. But it really starts with that consultation, and we can't get into too much of it. I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to encourage folks, you know, we have to acknowledge that we're a part of a system that strict language from our students. And knowing that, we also have to acknowledge it's our job, even though we weren't the ones that did it, it's our job to make sure that we create that space and allow time and conversation to bring it back into our classrooms. I always tell folks, tribal language never stays in the classroom that it starts. It always spreads throughout the school. It always impacts more than just that classroom. It always impacts more than just language learning, right? You cannot separate language and culture. And so it's its own little bundle, and you can't separate culture and social emotional, right? Learning and ways of teaching and living. So it's a really big nugget. And I know folks have talked about it throughout the webinar, but just making sure that we all know it's our job as well to take some of that time to research, to carve out time and space, and acknowledge the importance that our languages hold for our students and for our families. When we talk about bringing families back, the strongest way to bring back families is to carve out that space for them to feel like they have input. So that's all I have. I know we're almost out of time. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, that puts me in mind of, you know, the words you have limit your perspective on the world, right? So the more you know, the more open-minded you can be. We have just a few minutes left. It's gone so fast today. We hope that this information does not stop here and that you continue the conversation with your leadership team, with PLC, with students that you're interacting with in your communities. We hope that you can take this to the next level and commit to taking a next step. So if you have a next step, you can put it in the chat, and we'd love to see where you want to take this information next. We have some resources that we want to share as well. But first I want to make sure that we launch our evaluation just so I don't forget to do that. Yes, launch it. Okay. Your evaluations have helped us throughout the years to make these webinars so much better and to bring you really quality panelists and practitioners and national experts, honestly. So we love your suggestions, and we look forward to continuing to improve. Some of the resources that we like to share in our webinar are about unlocking funding. The people on this webinar, of course, are here as resources to you as well, and all of our email addresses are included in our slides. There are training materials on Dr. Whelshula's website that are really great, kind of grab and grow kind of resources, and meeting with her is a great way to learn about what else is on there as well. Our Native education curriculum materials are also available for you. And we have a Native education page as well as our Since Time Immemorial curriculum. We do have a Connect with OSPI staff button, but lots of options to get in contact with us. And we really do, we want to support you in this work. Hearing about how Shandy was helping with Linda, that's the kind of thing that we hope other people can do as well. We do have an engaged newsletter. Our newsletter is designed to appeal to education leaders, leadership teams. It usually has resources attached to our webinars. So if you want to get more information, articles, that kind of thing, that is out each month, and it's in our resource sheet if you want to look at the resource sheet. Next month is our last webinar of the year. We're going to be talking about the power of youth co-design. So excited to look at that as well, and getting voice and choice into classes around the schools as well. That's our last webinar for the year. We hope to see you next month. We want everyone who wants clock hours to get clock hours. So if you joined us live, you're already registered for the year through Zoom. You also need to register for clock hours monthly in PD Enroller. PD Enroller will send you an evaluation to your email, and we'll verify your attendance and release those hours. If you're watching this video later, the process changes. You register each month for clock hours in PD Enroller. You complete the evaluation, and you'll also do our graduation equity feedback survey, just to signal to us that you watched the video, and we can verify that attendance every 2 weeks, and you get your hours that way. If you have questions about this, you can email Ronnie Larson, who does our clock hours support. And thank you, Jocelyn, those are in the chat. And can we give one big round of applause for our panel and for Dr. Whelshula as well? Just so honored that you all came and worked with us this month, and looking forward to seeing what's next.